Today's video is brought to you by Marvel's Midnight Suns. Throughout his long history, Spider-Man has come up against the magical side of the Marvel Universe on several occasions, even going so far as to wield magical abilities himself. Despite this, Spider-Man was always considered a superhero with a science-based origin, but this has been called into question. Intrigued? Let's take a look. Peter was created to be an average teenager that younger readers could connect with. He wasn't perfect and he made mistakes and he had real-life issues, while also dealing with the daily responsibility of being a superhero. The character of Spider-Man was first created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, and he would first appear at Amazing Fantasy number 15 in August 1962. At the time, Spider-Man went against every norm that had been established for superheroes in comic books. You see, he was a teenager superhero, even though teenagers were always sidekicks to the main hero. He had real teenage problems, even though heroes had no problems and always got the girl. And he was also based on a bug. And the Marvel publishers believed that no one would like a hero based on a bug, because people hate bugs. But Stan and Steve stuck to their ideas, and Spider-Man was created. Though the timeline has been adjusted over the years, many things have always remained the same about his origin. Young Peter Parker lived with his Aunt May and his Uncle Ben in Queens. One day, while on a school trip to a science experiment, he was bitten by a radioactive spider, and this bite is what gave him the powers far beyond that of a normal man. He was given super strength, agility, speed, perfect balance, the ability to cling and climb surfaces, and a spider sense that alerts him to danger. Peter Parker is also shown to be brilliant, and he designs web shooters that allow him to shoot adhesive webs that allow him to swing. But Peter would not immediately decide to use these powers to fight crime. Like most teenagers, his only thought is how he could benefit from this. So he creates a costume and decides to become a television star. Using his new powers to make money, it was on a fateful night that he decided to not stop a robber, believing that he shouldn't get involved. It was later that he discovered that the thief had murdered his Uncle Ben. Peter would learn then that with great power must also come great responsibility, and so he became Spider-Man, using his abilities to protect the innocent and fight crime. Now, even though he is a superhero, Peter still has to put up with the everyday life of a teenager. He's awkward around girls, such as Mary Jane Watson and Gwen Stacy, and he's constantly bullied by Flash Thompson. He would eventually move to the city and attend college, where he would meet his best friend, Harry Osborn, and he would get a job at the Daily Bugle, taking photographs of Spider-Man to help his Aunt May financially, all while dealing with the likes of J. Jonah Jameson. Spider-Man's cast of characters would eventually grow to include the likes of Betty Brant, Norman Osborn, Felicia Hardy, and George Stacy. He would gather a collection of some of the best rogues in comics, including Mysterio, the Vulture, Venom, Green Goblin, Hobgoblin, Dr. Octopus, the Rhino, and Kraven the Hunter. There's also more, like Electro, Carnage, Sandman, and Kingpin. Spider-Man has had a long and illustrious career, which has continued with no breaks since his inception. While his entire history would be way too much to explain in this video, here's some highlight stories from his time. Amazing Spider-Man number 39 and 40. Green Goblin had been a thorn in Peter's side for some time, but it was when he discovered that Peter Parker was Spider-Man that it became a real problem. Green Goblin would then begin to torment Peter in a rivalry that would last decades. He would finally reveal himself as Norman Osborn, and while Norman would develop amnesia from their fights and all those blows to his head, it wouldn't last and he would return time and time again. This would eventually lead to one of the more famous storylines in Spider-Man's history, the death of Gwen Stacy, which is heralded as not only an important moment in Spider-Man's history, but in comics in general. After Green Goblin kidnaps Gwen Stacy, he drops her off a rooftop. Spider-Man leaps to save her and catches her with a web line, but the force of the stop snaps her neck. Enraged, Peter would assault Norman, and the villain was thought to be dead at the end of the story. This, like many deaths in comics though, would not last. And with that, we move down the years, with many amazing stories happening. But we'll next look at the birth of one of Spider-Man's greatest villains, Venom. After the events of Secret Wars, Peter would return to the Earth sporting a new costume that had some strange abilities. The suit also seemed to make him stronger and much angrier. Peter would eventually learn that the suit is actually a symbiotic alien that has bonded with him. He would manage to free himself from its influence, believing that he had destroyed it. But the suit would actually bond with Eddie Brock, who blamed Peter for all of the bad things in his life. Together, they would become the villain known as Venom, and they would plague Peter for some time before eventually becoming a frenemy, and then just a friend. During his time with the symbiote, the events of Kraven's last hunt took place, which saw the big game hunter return to New York to prove that he was better than Spider-Man. After defeating the wall crawler, Kraven would bury him alive and take over as Spider-Man, defeating criminals more violently while dressed as Spider-Man. Peter would regain his strength and free himself, which would eventually lead to another important event, while Peter Parker wasn't technically Peter Parker. You see, after Dr. Octopus managed to transfer his mind into Peter Parker's body, he set out to become the superior Spider-Man. And he would learn that despite his intelligence and willingness to do anything to do the job, Peter is the superior Spider-Man, and he gave up the body back to the original Peter. The major event that leads Peter into a more mystical side is actually the SpiderVerse. After Peter learns that he is actually the Spider Totem of the 616 universe, he joins a multiversal war against Spider Totem-eating vampires. Siding with spiders from across the multiverse, he must eventually defeat them and protect the Web of Destiny. But wait, what? I thought Spider-Man had a scientific origin. What is this about totems and the Web of Destiny? Well, faithful viewer, I'm glad you asked, 'cause it gets insane. So let's take a brief look into the times that Spider-Man has walked on a bit more of the magical side. You see, Spider-Man is actually no stranger to the mystical parts of the Marvel Universe, including the likes of Doctor Strange, who he has teamed up with numerous times and considers one of his friends. In the Amazing Spider-Man Annual No. 2, Spider-Man and Strange teamed up to fight against a villain known as Xanadu, leaping through the trippy magical realms. They would then join forces again in Marvel Team Up No. 21. This time, Strange would actually switch his powers with Spider-Man, which allowed the wall crawler to use magic just like the Sorcerer Supreme. This of course would not last, and he would return to his normal power set. Anytime that the wall crawler has come in contact with the Sorcerer Supreme, you could assume that magic was going to be involved. In a more recent storyline called Symbiote Spider-Man Alien Reality, I know it's a really long title, Spider-Man found himself waking up in a strange world, and he discovered that the Hobgoblin had actually teamed up with Baron Mordo and used the Word of God to alter reality. Still clad in his symbiote suit, Spider-Man had to team up with Red Cat, an alternate version of Natasha Romanoff. In this world, Baron Mordo was also the Sorcerer Supreme, so Spider-Man sets out to find Stephen Strange. When he locates him, Stephen decides to teach Peter in the ways of the mystical arts, giving him the powers that he needs to defeat Mordo and the Hobgoblin. The two manage to defeat the villains and they set the world right. But all of this is merely the tip of the iceberg. Let's talk about how Spider-Man is the Spider Totem of the 616 universe. Spider-Man's more mystical origins were first introduced in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 2, No. 30, written by J. Michael Straczynski. In this story, Peter comes in contact with a man named Ezekiel, who also has spider powers. He asks if Peter believes that the spider gave him powers because of the radiation, or if the spider had powers and was trying to give them to Peter before the radiation killed it. This question alone asks if Peter's powers are magically based or science-based. Spider-Man would learn that he is a spider totem in our universe, and would run into Ezekiel a few more times. Ezekiel would betray him and try to sacrifice him to a monstrous spider totem, hoping to gain Peter Parker's powers and become the totem of our world. He would have a change of mind though and sacrifice himself, allowing Peter to become the true totem of the 616 universe, or was he? Spider-Man would learn later of the Web of Destiny and how he is connected to it. He discovered that it was a great weaver that chose those who would be receptacles for the great totems, and that Peter had been chosen as the avatar for the Other, a spider deity. This is what allowed for his spider powers, but he was actually suppressing his spider side. After he died at the hands of Morlun, one of those spider totem-eating vampires, he was cocooned by the Other under the Brooklyn Bridge. The Other then came to him in his mind and told him that he could live if he accepted his spider side. He accepted it and was reborn, now with even more powers. It was after the world was altered by Mephisto during Brand New Day that the events were changed again and Peter wouldn't accept. He still came back to life, but was the same old Spider-Man, and this allowed the Other to choose Kane as its avatar. Kane is a clone of Spider-Man that was evil at one point because he was slightly a bad clone who had like face problems and stuff. It's a long story. We're not even going to touch on the clone saga here. Anyway, things would get even more trippy during the SpiderVerse event, which saw Spider-Man joining a multiversal war alongside the other spider totems against the Inheritors, the family of totem-eating vampires that Morlun belonged to. Spider-Man would then go on to the Web of Destiny, joining his fellow spiders and help hunt down several prophecies that would result in the Inheritors being defeated. They all came back though. I mean, it's comics. What do you expect? No one actually ever gets defeated or dies. So there you go. I bet you didn't know that Spider-Man was actually a mystical superhero. Or, well, was. Who knows what kind of magical hijinks Spider-Man will get up to in Marvel's Midnight Suns. Check back later as we dive more into the history of heroes that will be appearing in the game. Thank you so much.